All right, here we go. Well, listen, we're going to get started now. I think most people have arrived, so we'll begin. So welcome everyone to this new webinar. By now, you're probably starting to get used to it. Every Tuesday, we organize sessions focused on evaluation by students. We've covered best practices and use cases. Last week, we covered group member evaluation, and this week, it's going to be focused on the evaluation of assignments by students. In the coming weeks, you'll also see sessions on evaluating oral presentations, students evaluating feedback, and co-evaluation. So what is co-evaluation? It's evaluation done by students, but also at the same time by teachers. And finally, on June 17th, we will have a webinar on the evaluation of teaching. In this case, it's the students who will evaluate the quality of the teaching they have received. Quickly, I'll introduce myself as usual. My name is Florent, and I'm a coach at Challenge Me. We have a platform for evaluation and learning. We work with most higher education institutions. We have integrated with the school's tools to make things easier, whether for teachers, the educational services, or directly for students. As I was saying, today we are going to talk about the evaluation of assignments by students. So I'll give you a brief overview, a little summary of the presentation I have planned. It will last about 20 to 25 minutes. We will finish with a Q&A session, and at the end, you'll see there's a little bonus. I'll do a very practical demonstration, let's say, on the platform, showing how to create a peer evaluation by students. First, I will present the benefits, the actual definition of peer evaluation, and the skills that are developed. Next, I will present a few use cases, in fact, some scenarios to target these skills. Then we'll take a look at what Challenge Me brings and the user experience for this type of evaluation. After that, I've put together a small checklist to help you prepare your challenge. So a challenge is a peer evaluation activity, and I've made a little checklist for you. This is something we are regularly asked for to know what needs to be prepared beforehand. So it's not really best practices, it's more of a checklist to say, okay, this is ready, this is ready, this is ready, and so on. Afterwards, we can look at the key steps, so the configuration of a challenge. I've made a little timeline for you, and you'll be able to see all the steps involved in creating a challenge. To finish, as I mentioned, there will be a Q&A session if you have any questions. And for those who wish to stay, I'll do a very quick presentation. It will last 5 to 10 minutes at most in total by presenting the Challenge Me platform directly. So let's start at the beginning. So let's talk a bit about the definition of peer assessment, assessment of work by students. It's an educational process in which students evaluate their peers based on predefined criteria. For example, they might assess CVs, internship reports, videos, and so on. You'll see that on the platform. You can use any type of file. You can upload any type of file, so you can address all kinds of use cases. As I mentioned, on the next slide, you'll see some of the possible scenarios. And this method aims to develop several skills, notably critical thinking, autonomy, and the ability to give and receive feedback. And there you have it. This will reinforce all of that. It will strengthen active learning and accountability, because students will put themselves a bit in the role of the evaluator, which is something they're not necessarily used to. So to go into a bit more detail about these different skills, critical thinking, for example, will develop students' abilities to analyze and evaluate. The diversity of perspectives is really interesting because, in fact, they will be exposed to multiple points of view and different approaches, both through the feedback they receive and the assignments they evaluate. On the same topic, they'll be able to see how other students, how other groups have worked. So that's really interesting. They'll be able to reflect a bit on the way they actually learn, in quotes, with the feedback they've received, how they'll need to improve, and so on. They'll be able to refine their ability to objectively evaluate their peers' work according to defined criteria. As I was saying, it's something they're not necessarily used to doing. So it's really interesting to expose them, to confront them, in fact, with this role of being a grader, which they don't have throughout their studies, which they haven't necessarily had to do before. It will also allow them, and this is a really important point, to develop the art, let's say, of feedback, whether it's giving feedback or receiving feedback. How do you receive feedback? It's just as important as knowing how to give it. This is especially important if these are schools that are training managers, project leaders, and so on. It's extremely important to have this skill and also a bit of self-regulation in order to actually improve one's own work. So I've produced a piece of work, but then I'll be able to improve it because I will have discovered the work of my classmates. I will have evaluated them, and by definition, that will help me learn, and I'll be able to improve the next assignments I might have to do on this subject. I'm going to show you a few use cases that specifically address these skills. I've really defined two types of scenarios on the Challenge Me platform. You'll see we have fairly standard scenarios that unfold in 3 phases. So you'll notice that there's a whole system of phases with Challenge Me that you can arrange however you like. And in the standard scenarios, the 3 phases are the classic 3 phases. So there's a submission phase where students will submit their work, an evaluation phase where students can assess the work of other groups or classmates, and a results display phase where they can view the grade they've received, the grade based on the peer evaluations they've received, as well as the feedback they've been given. In these typical scenarios, we see the submission and evaluation of resumes, videos, podcasts, essays, computer code, internship reports, posters, and PowerPoint presentations. We can imagine any type of material. As I mentioned, there are no format restrictions on the Challenge Me platform, so we can imagine that students can really submit any kind of work. And then there are slightly more developed scenarios that really target specific skills, particularly a somewhat more advanced scenario. That's the one I mentioned. So it's the iterative work, the first one, and that's the example I used below. In the phases, you can see following one another. So for this scenario, there will be a first phase where students submit their work. For example, we might ask students to create a video. Next, students will be asked to directly evaluate their peers' video. After that, students will only be able to view the feedback they receive from their peers. And then, thanks to the feedback they've received, they will be able to improve their video and submit a second version of their video. So here, they are truly learning through feedback and improving their work based on their peers' feedback. And then they will be able to be evaluated a second time. And finally, they will receive a grade, but not for work that was done beforehand, rather for work that could be improved thanks to the feedback they received. You'll see that with this scenario, we can even go further. I'll talk about that in just a moment. We can do co-evaluation, meaning that in the final evaluation phase, we can also, why not, involve teachers. And in this case, the grade given would be the one assigned by teachers for the work that was improved based on the students' feedback. So we can have scenarios like this, which are a bit more complex. We can also have exam preparation. So here we could imagine asking students to submit several different assignments. If, for example, they have an overall project and need to submit a marketing plan, a business plan, and so on. We could imagine that they submit multiple assignments and the students would then evaluate each of these assignments. We can also potentially have multiple choice question, MCQ assessments. So in this case, the instructor would upload an MCQ to the platform. The students would answer this MCQ on the platform, and then during the evaluation phase, it would actually be the students who assess their peers' answers to the MCQs. And above all, the main benefit is to provide feedback, to give tips and ideas on how one could have found the correct answer for the responses that the student judged as incorrect. It's a somewhat specific use case, but one that works well. By the way, for exam preparation, if the exams are generally multiple choice, it can be interesting to prepare for them using peer assessment like this. Next, we can also have the evaluation of large cohorts. In this case, it's extremely practical because a teacher can't necessarily assess hundreds of students. So we use student assessment to generate some grades this way and to have a large number of evaluations carried out on each assignment. And research has shown that the more evaluations are performed on a piece of work, the closer the result gets to a teacher's assessment. So that's quite interesting. Often what people tell us is, yes, but the problem is that when students assess each other, if they submit plagiarized work or work generated by AI, it's more difficult for them to detect it. We can absolutely add specific evaluation criteria to detect AI, and students will then assess the assignments they're reviewing based on those specific criteria as well. That way, it can alert teachers to certain assignments that may have been created primarily with AI. It can also be interesting to implement this kind of scenario. And then we have two scenarios. There are many others, but here are two I wanted to talk to you about, which will be the topics of the next webinars next week and the week after, namely in-class presentations. Here, the idea is that students present their work directly in class, and instead of being passive during the presentations, the other students will actively evaluate the presentations they are watching. And we also have, as I mentioned, peer assessment. In this case, the idea is that students submit a piece of work or give a presentation, and a group of students will evaluate it. And in addition to that, a group of teachers or a teacher would also evaluate the work directly. This will really be the topic of an upcoming webinar in the following weeks. We will take a closer look at how Challenge Me can address these use cases, why it is interesting to use Challenge Me compared to another solution, and all the benefits it offers with the user experience of our platform. Here, I've quickly put up a screenshot for those who really want to see the platform. As I mentioned before, we can look at this at the end of the webinar, where I will actually show you the interfaces directly. The advantage of Challenge Me is that it's a platform that is quite intuitive and easy to use, especially for participants and students. This is often a concern for teachers. Each time it's a new platform and they'll have to get used to it and so on. But with Challenge Me, you should know that it's really very easy to get the hang of. I'll show you the interfaces if you'd like. Afterwards, there are never any questions about how they should use the platform. It's quite instinctive and intuitive. So there's no issue on that front. Next, what's very convenient is that we'll have a unified interface, whether it's for submitting assignments, evaluations, or results. Everything is centralized on the same interface, as I mentioned, and also centralized within a single activity in your course. You'll add just one activity to your course, and students will simply need to click on that activity. And as I mentioned, phases, depending on which phase is open, students will be directly redirected to the submission phase if they need to submit their work, to the evaluation phase if they need to evaluate, or even to the results phase if they need to check their results. But you only have a single activity, a single challenge. It's the same interface for everyone. So this greatly simplifies the use of this type of assessment. I also mentioned this earlier. All types of file formats are accepted on the platform. If you want students to submit videos, resumes, code, computer files, programming files, and so on, no problem. All file formats are accepted. By default, in fact, they can submit any format, but you also have options to restrict the allowed formats. So if you specifically want them to submit a document in PDF format, that's absolutely possible. You can set restrictions at that level and even define the maximum number of documents that can be submitted and so on. So there is a lot of flexibility regarding file formats when setting up a submission phase for assignments. Assignments can be submitted either as a group or individually. For example, if I take the example of Moodle Workshop, you can't submit assignments as a group directly. But here you can have group assignment submissions with individual evaluation. You can also imagine individual submissions with group evaluation. You can pretty much do whatever you want. It's really very convenient from that perspective. You truly have the freedom to create whatever scenario you want. Another point that often comes up is the distribution of assignments. Once all the assignments have been submitted on the platform, which student will have to evaluate which work? The platform takes care of all of that. There is a fair distribution of the number of assignments to be evaluated. You simply define, I want each student to evaluate X assignments. You will set a name, for example, 3 assignments, and the platform will handle everything. And each time a student logs in, the assignments that have received the fewest evaluations will be presented to the student so that all assignments receive roughly the same number of evaluations. That's also really interesting. Similarly, you will be able to set up your own evaluation rubric for the assessment phase, define your own criteria, but also choose criteria from our database. We have, I don't know, maybe 100 criteria available on the platform. So you can pick and choose from this database of criteria. You can create your own rubrics. You can take our criteria, modify them if you wish, and so on. You can pretty much do whatever you want with the criteria and also set different evaluation methods. But I'll come back to that in just a moment. Anonymity is also guaranteed between participants. So that's really important. Let me clarify. Anonymity can be lifted. There is an option to lift anonymity, but by default, all interactions between participants will be anonymous. That means when I evaluate a piece of work, I am not evaluating a person. I won't know who I'm evaluating. I'm assessing a piece of work that is presented to me directly. Similarly, during the results phase, I will receive comments, possibly grades, and I won't know which person left me that comment or grade. So everything is anonymous between participants. This is a point you can emphasize during the presentation or when starting an activity, because it's something that reassures them. You also have a complete dashboard. This is really on the teacher's side. You have a complete dashboard with tracking interfaces, real-time data on participation in your challenge to see who has properly submitted work, who has completed evaluations, whether all evaluations have been done, the grades that have been given, and the feedback that has been provided. You also have complete administrative management. If you want to possibly invalidate a piece of work or an evaluation, or on the contrary, add a submission on behalf of a participant because they have a valid reason for not being able to do it themselves, you have the option to add a submission on behalf of a student. You can even evaluate on behalf of a student. Imagine a student sends you their evaluation document. If they weren't able to do it through the interface, you can do it for them, and so on. This way, you really have a very comprehensive tracking interface on the Challenge Me platform. There is also a complete automatic notification system. You will be able to define when you want notifications to be sent throughout your challenge. And you can also easily send manual reminders, so to speak, with just one click. There is a button to send reminders to all students who haven't participated. So that's quite convenient. Some teachers like to send a little reminder halfway through the process. Well, here, with just one click, you can send a reminder directly. And as I mentioned, it won't remind all students because those who have already participated won't receive the reminder. It will only be sent to those who haven't completed their evaluations yet. And to finish, I'll put in a little word for Jean and myself, who are the coaches at Challenge Me. We offer truly personalized support. If you have any questions, if you want to create a challenge and so on. If you have slightly more complex scenarios, don't hesitate to contact us. We're here to support you directly with any type of evaluation. Even if it's just a 5-minute meeting, that's not a problem. Don't hesitate to send us a quick email or book a short appointment, and we'll be happy to help you. Let's take a look at the checklist I mentioned earlier. Basically, this is what you can prepare ahead of an evaluation. So it might not be exhaustive, but I think that if you go through this entire list, you'll be ready, you'll be prepared to create an activity. There shouldn't be any issues when creating the activity. So the first thing to do is to define. Some things may seem obvious, but we often get questions about these kinds of points, so I prefer to write them down. Define whether the assessments should be done in groups or individually. When there are group projects, sometimes, when we mention that on the platform, you can also do group assessments, teachers start to wonder, would that be relevant in my case? Actually, I didn't think it was possible. I would like to do a group assessment after all. So there you go. You can decide in advance whether the assessments should be done in groups. So in a group, the idea would be for the students to discuss among themselves. One person from the group will give an assessment to another person or another group on behalf of their group directly. Another important point is to have the list of participants ready, whether it's directly in your course or in an Excel file. You can absolutely import participants from your course, groups from your course, or directly from an Excel file if the groups are not present in your group. So that's important as well. Just so you know, I'm making a little checklist, but if you don't have a particular piece of information, it's not a problem. You can still create your challenge and come back to it later to add information. But here, the idea is to have a slightly more exhaustive list. Next, you'll be able to prepare your criteria grid, and we strongly recommend sharing or presenting it to the students before the activity. When you create an assignment and you know the criteria on which you'll be evaluated, you generally produce better work. So we really recommend sharing this criteria grid beforehand, or even building it together with the students in a session prior to the activity. You'll also be able to, there's this criteria grid, you'll define which criteria to use, but you'll also be able to define the evaluation methods. On the platform, you'll be able to set up different methods. You can ask students to evaluate each other using a star rating system. This is a bit more playful. It's similar to how we rate restaurants, hotels, and so on. You can also simply ask them to give grades, which is a more traditional academic approach. There are predefined options. Here, they will select options based on a criterion that has been set. Check boxes, so basically yes, no options. But you can also set up a more specific evaluation method, which is feedback only. In this case, students won't give any grades at all for a particular criterion, for example. It will be more of an open-ended question, and they will be able to leave feedback specifically on that criterion. Next, what we also recommend is to present students with best practices, or at least provide a guide to best practices on how to give feedback and how to receive feedback. We have guides for that. So don't hesitate to ask us for them by default when you create an activity on the platform. In the evaluation phase, in the instruction section, there is also a guide that explains how to give quality feedback. But again, don't hesitate to present it to students beforehand as well. It's always helpful. You will also be able to set the number of assignments each participant has to evaluate. It's good to know this in advance to help manage the student's workload a bit. So to manage the student's workload, we will set a number of criteria and a number of assignments. If there are many criteria to evaluate, we might lower the number of assignments. If there are only a few criteria to assess on an assignment that can be reviewed quickly, we might increase the number of assignments to evaluate. This will allow students to receive more feedback. So that's up to you to decide the number of assignments to be evaluated, but it's a good idea to think about it a bit in advance. Next, you should define the calculation method and the grade you want right from the start, because the system will be able to calculate a grade directly on the platform using all the evaluations the students have received. And you can also apply penalties if participants do not participate as required, or if they participate late, because you can also manage late submissions, whether they are late assignments or late evaluations. You can handle this, and the platform detects whether it's a late submission or a late evaluation, and you can apply penalty points accordingly. So there you go. You can already start to define a little bit what you want to do for the grade calculation, and possibly also assign different weights to the various criteria. You might decide that one criterion carries more weight than another, so you can imagine all of that. And once you have defined this, you will be able to easily implement it on the platform. Finally, you will be able to define the result options that you want to display to the students. Again, this is something to consider. We notice that teachers don't always think about it, and when we create a challenge with them, they see that it's possible to display various options. So it's interesting to consider, do I want to show the grade to the student? Their grade, meaning all the grades they've received, the average. Do I only want to show them the feedback? Do I want to display all the details of the grades they've received and all the feedback, etc.? And you can check different options like this to select what you want to display. And you can also absolutely choose not to display any results to the student directly. So the results will only be available to you as the teacher, and the students themselves will not be able to view them. This happens in certain quite specific use cases, such as, for example, as I mentioned last week, regarding the identification of free riders. In that case, we often choose not to make the results available to students. They are only available to teachers. So that's a bit of a checklist. During the Q&A session, don't hesitate to let us know anything. If you notice that any small elements are missing, please feel free to tell us. Now let's take a look at the key steps involved in setting up a challenge with Challenge Me here. So there are 5 steps. The first step, as I mentioned at the very beginning of the webinar, is adding the activity to your course. As I said, we are connected to the LMS courses of institutions, so you can simply add a challenge activity to your course. And that's how the creation of a challenge begins. So by adding an activity to your course, next you will define evaluation periods, submission periods for assignments, and so on. As I mentioned, there's always this system of phases where in one phase you set it from a certain date to another date, in a second phase from one date to another, and so on. You can, as I mentioned, set up late submission phases if needed to allow the submission of assignments or evaluations, even if it's technically over. So you have a whole set of dates to manage and define. Next, you will enroll the participants, whether individually or in groups. As I said, you can retrieve the groups from your course or via an Excel file. We will enroll the participants for each phase. After that, we will define the criteria. So you will create your own set of criteria or select the criteria available in the Challenge Me database. Define the evaluation methods. And finally, in the results phase, you will be able to configure the calculation method a bit and so on, the number of assignments to be evaluated and so on. So that's roughly how it works on the Challenge Me platform. But if you have all the elements in place, you'll see that creating an activity, maybe not the first time since you'll be exploring all the options and how everything works. But once you start getting a bit used to the platform, you can launch a peer evaluation activity in less than 5 minutes, whether it's for 10, 100, or even 1,000 students, very quickly and directly. I've covered all these points, so we have to be quick because we're taking 20 minutes. We also don't want to take up too much of your time. So there you go. I've finished these points. Please don't hesitate if you have any questions in the chat, or if you want to turn on your microphone to ask your questions, I'll let you do that now. And for those who want to stay, I'm actually going to start the platform walkthrough right away. In fact, I'll show you directly how to launch this type of evaluation on the Challenge Me platform. So I'm going to switch screens, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask them directly. By turning on your microphone, I can absolutely give the presentation and answer your questions at the same time. All right, I'm going to share the other screen. I'll put this here. Can everyone see my screen clearly? Is it good? Perfect. Thank you for confirming. Now I'm on the login interface of the platform. For this presentation, I won't be going through an LMS. I don't have a course, I don't have an LMS, and I'm not going to add an activity in the LMS. I'm going directly, so to speak, onto the Challenge Me platform. Something I haven't mentioned, by the way, is that you don't have to create a challenge through your course. If you have students who are enrolled in multiple courses, or if you simply don't use the school's tool, you can still absolutely use Challenge Me independently, directly, with the usual login and password information to sign in. I'm going to log in directly here. Hold on, I'm just going to switch screens for a moment because I have everything open here. There we go. I'll put this here. I'm going to create a new challenge here. I'll go to my Challenge Me space in my course called Tech, and I'll have several. When you create a challenge, you have several templates available. So here there are 3 that are displayed. Just so you know, I'm on a development platform right now. Actually, I'm on the development version of the ChatMe platform to show you the brand new interfaces that will be released in a few weeks. We figured there wasn't much point in showing you the current interfaces if they're going to change in 2 or 3 weeks. So I prefer to show you the new interfaces directly, especially the models that will be available on these new interfaces. But not everything is here yet. There will be a lot more features. For now, I only have 3 models here, but you'll find many more on the platform once the new interfaces are live. So here you can already see that I have several models, including a submission, evaluation, and assignments model. This is the one that will interest me for the purposes of this webinar. Last week, I introduced you to the group member evaluation model, and next week you'll see the classroom presentation evaluation model. You can quickly see a brief description of the model and the different phases that will be added by default. So when you use a model, you'll see that you can still modify quite a few things. It's just a working base, in quotation marks, to get started to create your challenge. Afterwards, it might match exactly what you want. And in that case, as you'll see, creating the challenge will be very quick. So here, as I mentioned, I'm going to use this model with a submission phase, a feedback evaluation phase, and a results phase. So I'm going to click on Create. And now you can see that I have different steps to complete. The first step is the planning stage. And you can see that my 3 phases are right here. So by default, dates have been set, but I can easily click on each phase and set my own submission dates here. So here, if I want my students to assess themselves from May 21st to May 27th, I can enable notifications, as I mentioned earlier. And if I want, I can also set a late submission date. If I want to give them, for example, 1 extra day, there you go, 24 more hours, I can do that. So the students will be informed that the deadline is May 27th, but the platform will remain open until May 28th for those who are late right here directly. There you go, and in this way, I can set the dates for all my phases. I can also, if needed, rename the name of a phase. Why would it be useful to rename a phase? It's because the name of these phases will appear on the student interface, and it can provide a bit more context for them. So instead of just submission of assignments, I can, for example, write video submissions, for instance. I rename it, and at least the students know that this is the phase in which they need to submit their videos. Similarly, for assignment evaluation, I could potentially rename it to video evaluation. So here, it's just about planning. This way, I can plan my 3 phases: when they will submit, when they will evaluate, and when they will be able to view the results. If I need to create a slightly more complex scenario, no problem. I can absolutely add another phase. And here I have several types of phases available. I can create phases for evaluating received feedback. I can absolutely add a self-assessment phase, a phase for evaluating group members if the assignment is a group project, and so on. So I'm not locked into my model. I can absolutely adapt it if needed. Once I've managed my planning, I'll click Next and I'll see the instructions. Here, since I selected this model, I have default instructions, so you can review them. We make a few recommendations regarding file formats and so on. We include small alerts about certain formats that might be more complicated or have time limitations, links, things like that. But you can absolutely modify these instructions if needed. Same thing, then you move on to the evaluation phase of the assignments. You set the instructions for the evaluation phase of the assignments. Similarly, you can highlight the different criteria. You can absolutely arrange this as you wish. And likewise for the results phase, you can add some brief instructions, what we might call a closing remark for each student. And we always provide a guide on how to interpret and properly receive feedback. But if that doesn't suit you, you can absolutely modify it. Once we've managed our instructions, we can click Next. Now we'll look at the participants. Here, I can enroll my participants in the assignment submission. Then I can enroll my participants in the evaluation phase of the assignments here. If I go back to the video submission phase, I can enroll my participants individually or as a team here. This will directly fetch the participants from my course. In my example here, I'm not connected to a course, but the idea is that you are connected to your LMS and you can directly access all the participants and all the groups present in your course. Here, I'm going to click here, Enroll Individually. You will have the list of all your students. You can select all of them or only select some of them. You can select groups and only choose certain students. I'm going to add my participants here. I have my list of participants. If it's in Teams, it's the same. I can view the teams. If I want to add them as a team, I can absolutely add teams because teams have already been created. I will also be able to do the same thing for my evaluation phase. 2 options. Either I use the same participants. Here, I have a button, and instead of enrolling them individually again, I can simply say, I want to reuse exactly the same participants. So there you go. I will reuse the registrations from the video submission phase. And now, automatically, the students who are registered in the submission phase will be registered in the evaluation phase as well. And what's interesting with this approach is that if I modify a student here, if I remove a student, for example, if I unregister them, automatically, as you can see, 5, they will be unregistered from the evaluation phase as well. So it's really synchronized. This allows for simpler management of participants. You add them in just one PH, you integrate them in a single phase, you manage them in one phase, and any changes are reflected in the other phases if they use this option. Afterwards, if you have completely different participants, you can absolutely choose not to use this option. I can unregister everyone and only register certain people who might not even be involved in the submission phase. You have complete freedom when it comes to registering participants. But for now, I'm going to register everyone. There we go. So wait a moment, because it opened another window for me. There we go. I'm going to put this here. There, that's better. I'm going to enter. There, my participants. I have my participants. I have my instructions. Now, you can see that I'm going to move on to the evaluation criteria. So I'm going to click next and enter the criteria for this challenge. So as I was saying, we have a whole database of criteria. Here, I'm on my development platform. I don't have any criteria. So if I click on predefined challenge criteria, well, I don't have any. But on the production platform, you'll see there are hundreds. You'll be able to look through them, choose the evaluation method that will filter the specific criteria with that evaluation method, and you'll also be able to search for criteria directly by their name. I'm going to add a new criterion to show you how it looks here. So when you add a new criterion or when you edit a criterion you've included, you end up on this window, and here you can name the criterion, allow students to leave a comment on this criterion, set the evaluation method, the methods I mentioned, write a detailed description of this criterion, which we really recommend, and add context about the criterion. And then you can save this criterion. Yes, Dominique, a question.
Yes, actually, I thank you for the presentation. I've never tried it, but based on what you just said, I can actually add criteria. And for example, for the first criterion, sorry, I can use star rating, and for the second criterion, I can change it.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. We can, there you go. You're not required to. Once you've defined an evaluation method, it's linked to a single criterion, and I can absolutely have this criterion with, let's say, I change the stars, I set it to 5 stars. Let's imagine I create my little scale. 1 star means this, 2 stars mean that, 3 stars means something else. I save it, I add a second criterion, and here, well, it's going to be, I want it to be a checkbox. There you go. And I can absolutely mix things up or request a score out of 20. And here it will be, let's say, new criterion 2, I'll name it. And in addition, I can allow students to leave a comment. I'm going to save. There you go. My first criterion is rated with 5 stars. My second criterion will be a score. There you have it.
Oh, great. Okay. Actually, I never realized.
No, you can mix evaluation methods. Each criterion is independent from the others. I'll come back in a moment to the options, to the grade calculation. But you'll see that, in fact, you have 2 options for calculating the grade. Either a point system. So what would a point system do? It would add the score from this criterion, so a maximum of 5 points, and the score from this criterion, so a maximum of 20 points. It would add them together, and that would give a grade. So I could have a maximum grade of 25. But by default, that's not how it works. By default, it's I decide to have a grade out of 20. And actually, in reality, this criterion, 5 out of 5, is worth a 20 out of 20. This criterion out of 20 is worth a 20 out of 20. If I give it 20, and the system will average all the criteria, putting them all more or less on the same level. So you really have 2 grading methods with this point system or this averaging system. That's what allows you to completely mix different assessment methods. You don't even have to, you can use only stars, but have some criteria with 5 stars and others with 10 stars. And that's absolutely fine. You also have the option, if you've defined your own set of criteria, to add those criteria directly to your favorites, which allows you to reuse them in other challenges, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you create a new challenge. If you've defined your own criteria, just add them to your favorites, and when you create your other challenges, you can click on predefined criteria, my criteria, and here you'll find all the criteria you've added to your favorites. By the way, you can also use predefined criteria, so they will be added here to the list of criteria for your challenge, and you can add them to your favorites to find them easily. Afterwards, you can also manage the order of the criteria directly here. So there you have it. This is really the main part of the work, let's say, for an evaluation. It happens here. It happens by properly creating your rubric with the right description, etc., to help students as much as possible with their assessments. Once you have created your rubric, you can decide whether or not you want to enable overall feedback. So we can see that you can enable feedback on each of the criteria, but you can also enable it overall directly so that students can leave a general comment on the work they are evaluating. Let's move on to the next options. So here, same principle. I'm in the options. I see my 3 phases again, so I can configure my options for each of the phases. In the submission of work, as I mentioned earlier, you will be able to set restrictions on file formats. The formats, so by default, it's a text field and files as attachments. So they can respond in text or add documents, and they can add any type of document. We can restrict it by saying, I don't want a text field. I don't want them to write a textual response. I want them to add documents, and I want them to add documents. And we have recommended formats, which are generally the ones most commonly used. There you go. I want them to be able to add only PDFs, and I want them to be able to add just one. I don't want them to start uploading multiple assignments to the platform. I only want one, and I want it to be in PDF format. You have the ability to configure this and set up these kinds of restrictions. You also have different options. A rather specific option here is for the submission of multiple completely independent assignments. Let's imagine that as part of a project, I can submit 2 versions of my work. I don't want these 2 versions to be evaluated at the same time. I want them to be assessed truly separately. By default, each student or each group can only submit one assignment. You can upload several documents, but they will all pertain to a single assignment that will be evaluated as a whole. But I can also absolutely allow the submission of multiple assignments per student, which will then be evaluated truly separately. So you can imagine students creating 2, 3, or 4 versions of their assignments. Let's imagine we're working on a poster, and well, I'm going to create 4 posters, and the 4 posters will be evaluated completely independently. So that's a somewhat specific case, but there is definitely the possibility to have this kind of option. Yes, Dominique?
Yes, sorry, another question, but so what you just said, is that spread out over time, or is it?
No, it will be during the same submission phase. So in this case, between May 21st and May 27th, I could, if this option is enabled as a participant, submit several versions of my work, actually directly.
So basically, sorry, I submit the first version on the 21st. Do I get feedback?
No, in this case, I just create several versions and they will then be evaluated during the evaluation phase. It's maybe to see which is the best version that will be assessed. So it's not an iterative process. I don't get feedback from my peers to create a new version. It's really, I start from scratch, I create several versions, and I have them all evaluated at the same time, and then I'll see the feedback I get on each of these versions. So we can imagine that's quite specific, but still it's a use case that can be.
That's interesting.
So there you go. That's how submissions work. You have all these options. You have options regarding the evaluation of the assignments. So here, there's only one. It's quite simple. It's just lifting anonymity. That's all. By default, as I mentioned, everything is anonymous, but you do have the option to lift anonymity. In what situation would we lift anonymity, for example? That's a case we'll discuss in an upcoming webinar. But during in-class presentations, classroom presentations, I know which group I'm evaluating. So obviously, I can absolutely evaluate and lift anonymity, whereas for assignments submitted on the platform, I would rather prefer anonymity and therefore keep that option. And then in the display of results, so here this is where we can define what we want to show to the participants. So the grade, the average, the breakdown of grades, the feedback, the overall average of the participants. I can also lift anonymity on the results. So if I check this option, I will see the names of the people who evaluated me, the names of the people who gave me this or that feedback. That's it. You can also completely hide the results from the participants. You still need to create a results phase, even if you want to hide the results from the participants. Why? Because actually this is where you will define how the grade is calculated. So you still need a results phase, even if you hide the results from the participants. And as I mentioned, the calculation of the grade will be done here. You will define the scale on which you want the grade to be calculated, the different weightings for each phase, for each criterion, and so on. The various late submission penalties. Let's say you allow late submissions. Well, you can assign penalty points to the submission phase for late work. The same goes for evaluation. You can assign penalty points to people who submit their evaluations late, and you can also penalize those who do not participate at all. For example, here are 2 penalty points for people who did not participate in the evaluation of assignments at all. Earlier, I was talking about this, so this is how it works with the average-based system, but I can switch to a points-based system. And as we saw earlier, I had set, I think, 5 stars for one criterion and 20 points for another. And if I switch here, you can see that the coefficients change completely to give a grade here that will be calculated using this point system, 20 plus 5. However, you have to manually convert it here and specify that you want your grade to be out of 25 and that it should be calculated using a points-based system. If I give an 18 out of 20 here, a 2 out of 3, and a 2 out of 5 here, that will give me a 20 out of 25. Those are the different options for displaying the results. To finish, we'll look at assigning the evaluations. So as I mentioned, it's done automatically by the platform. If I go to my evaluation phase, I just have to set the number of assignments each student will have to evaluate. But I can also, if needed, specify who evaluates whom. So we have automatic assignment. That's what we recommend and what is used most of the time. But you can also do what we call manual assignment and specify which participants or which group will evaluate a particular assignment directly here. So here I have the list of participants and I can click here to say, for example, Florent. He will have to specifically evaluate Ludovic. There you go. And the platform will take care of that and automatically assign him the work. It won't be done randomly. And finally, that's it. We're done and I can publish my challenge. And once I've published it, it will be accessible to the students as long as you've set the dates at the time of publication. So when the first date has started, you have the option to preview your challenge, where you'll also have the possibility to see all the advanced settings. So what are the advanced settings? They actually allow you to see all the available options. Here I chose a template at the beginning, and if I go to advanced settings, I'll have all the available options everywhere. And if I preview, I will see the student interfaces right here directly. So for submitting assignments, as I said, it's very simple. Here, students can submit a document. It's specified as PDF only because I left that option selected. I'll be able to add my work. And in a second phase, if I set the date to May 29th, I'll be able to evaluate the assignments assigned to me. So I have 3 assignments to evaluate. I'll click on each of these assignments, review them, and evaluate them right here on the right. There you go. I've given you a bit of an overview of these interfaces. Are there any other questions or is everything clear?
Yes, Florence from Centrale Lyon. No, actually, it's just that, well, it's super interesting and all that. It gives the impression that the whole preparation phase, well, you mentioned it earlier, but the advanced preparation phase for the teacher seems extremely time consuming and, well, it's, yeah.
Absolutely. That's why I was saying I detail every step, but actually once you're used to creating this kind of assessment, like I said, it only takes 5 minutes. Really, I took the time to explain everything in detail, but after that, everything goes much more smoothly. And when you create a challenge, well, you just click, you know what you want to do, you set up the assessment, you add a few criteria, and if you've already saved them, it's super fast. You register the participants, they're already in your course, you click, and in 5 minutes, you launch an assessment that should be, sometimes teachers even launch and create assessments the very same morning. So after that, it depends on what level you expect from the students. Have the students been prepared beforehand? What cohort of students do you have? Are they first-year students, fifth-year students? So you'll prepare them differently and so on. But then again, sometimes it requires more involvement in certain use cases than in others. It depends on the type of assessment you want to implement. As for the students, generally they are quite satisfied with this type of assessment. Now we're seeing it more and more. It's even the students themselves who are asking to be able to evaluate their classmates' work to receive feedback, especially. That's really interesting. Here we're talking about evaluating assignments, but last week it was about evaluating group members. It's the same. They are very eager for this kind of assessment so that grades can be individualized and so on. So yes, it might be a bit more work sometimes for the teacher, but in the end, there's a real benefit for the student.
Thank you. I'm absolutely, truly convinced of that.
That's great. That's kind of you.
I do it regularly, but on the platform.
Yes, exactly. Well, yes, that's the idea. It's about being able to use it to industrialize, so to speak, especially with large cohorts and things like that, this process, or to be able to create it in a way that's simple and accessible for students. Because you can do it with Excel files, of course, but then when it comes to compiling the results and so on, it can sometimes seem a bit complicated. One thing I didn't mention, by the way, is about tracking activity. Once everything has been completed, you can publish the grades directly in the course gradebook or export them in Excel format. So that's also really interesting to have this option. There's no need to compile the results. Everything is on the platform and you just have to export them whenever you want.
Sorry, I have one more question. If you still have a minute.
Yes.
Can you go back to the planning part? you know, where you have the dates.
There you go, right here.
Sorry. And actually on the screen, if you ever have all the way to the right of the screen, you have the two, I don't know how to say it, you know, yes, that's it, yes.
Here, yeah.
There's one that's linked to the...
So that's for slightly more complex cases. It's to see the phases that are linked to each other. So here, this evaluation phase, you can see there's a 1, meaning it's linked to a previous phase, the submission phase, and a following phase, the results phase. The results phase is linked to a previous phase, its evaluation phase, and the submission phase is only linked to the following phase, the evaluation phase. So that's what we see. Actually, this allows you to, if I add a phase and configure it, here, there you go, I'm going to create the phase. Here, I can see that, for example, here, there's a 0.
It's not linked to anything.
That means actually there's nothing after it. And it means that my results phase here will not include this evaluation phase here.
But actually then the two symbols, they're different, but it makes me wonder.
The two symbols, there's one that only, well, we'll see it here. Actually, if I apply a filter here, I'll see the phases directly linked to this phase. In fact, in our case here, we only have 3 phases, so we almost don't need it. But there are use cases where there are a lot of phases that follow one another. And so it can be useful to say, well, I only want to see the related phases. And here I want to see only the phase that's linked to this submission phase. It actually filters, they're filters.
Ah, okay.
And there you go. And now I can say to myself, okay, so it's really linked to this work phase. That's great. This result phase, I want to see what it's linked to. Okay, it's properly linked to this evaluation phase, etc. And here, this lets you see the entire workflow here. So here, it's only the linked phase or phases. And here, it's the workflow. So what is the workflow? Well, it's all of this because everything is connected to each other. The workflow here is everything that's linked together, because you can have challenges where there's a first round here and you keep adding phases that have nothing to do with that first round. And with the workflow, at least we can adjust things more easily for a first session, a second session, and so on. So you should think of these as filters.
Ah, yes, okay. Thank you.
Exactly. They're indicators to check if we haven't made a mistake in a phase to see if we've linked it correctly. We can see that this feedback phase didn't yield any learning, so it potentially won't have any associated results phases. So I can click on it and select, choose the phases to link, my results phase, I click, I save, and that's it. And by the way, my results phase has now gone up to 2 here, so I have 2 phases linked to this phase, and I will indeed have the results included in the feedback received that will be included in my results phase.
Yeah, that really helps a lot, but I didn't understand the symbols.
There you go. That's a bit of an advanced use case. So you don't really need to understand it, especially for more standard formats. But when you have formats with a lot of phases, it's really handy to be able to see if everything is done properly, if nothing is missing, and if everything is well connected to each other.
Yes, because you end up getting lost at some point if you put in too many.
When there are a lot, yes, when there are a lot, that's it. The idea is to be able to focus on certain phases or paths easily, so you can set it up and not forget anything.
Okay, great. Thank you.
There you go. Well, I'll let you go have lunch now. It took a little more time, but as I said, this is kind of a bonus session to show you these new interfaces. These new interfaces, as I mentioned, are not yet available online. They will be in a few weeks. We hope before summer so that they can be used this summer and we can get feedback. And by the start of the school year, everything will be really well put together and possibly even further improved.
Great, thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.